phạt xe 400.
We good?
We're on. No.
We're on? Okay.
We're on.
We're on. Okay.
Hello, we're on.
That was an exciting intro, don't you think?
This is the very professional Cambridge Inside Out. My name's Susanna Sagat.
And my name is Robert Winters.
See, if you only saw what happened before the camera goes on, you would understand.
That's right. And I'm geeking out a little bit here, just sort of trying to locate something on this fancy-dancy computing machine. Yeah, actually, if you can make that a little smaller, that would be kind of good. I don't know
I'm
how
going
to
to
do
try.
that. So anyway, we were doing some news
Is that
updates.
what that's doing? Okay.
That's it. We're doing some news updates in our previous half hour.
No, I cannot do it.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's just making the page go up.
Ah, okay. All right.
It's not making it bigger.
That's all right.
Smaller.
We can live with it. We're at the mercy of technology in this place. So I thought maybe what we could do in our second half hour, exciting half hour tonight, is to get a little more geeky. It seems to be sort of the pattern of late. We have a chatty half hour followed by a geeky half hour. So this time we get to a little geeky. All right.
And we love that.
And we do that.
And hopefully you're staying with us and watching both of them. And you can always call in. I don't know if the number is showing down there, but our number is 617-876-0055.
That's right. So we're actually...
And if you call us and I see that light blinking, we will talk to you.
That's right. We're willing to speak. All right. Yeah, I'm sort of trying to locate one little piece of information that I had here, but I tell you, that's what it is. Okay, all right.
No one's going to be able to read that.
Well, I
try
don't
to
know.
increase it.
We can try it. We can try and do
no,
that.
see, it's just making it go page up and down.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe don't do that. So, well, you
Sorry.
don't. These fine folks, we'll do our best. We'll just talk through here. So let's just leave that be. All right, and then we'll just do that. So I want to get a little geeky here, a little bit more on the recount. And then maybe say another thing or two here. So the first little bit of geekiness is just this: that one of the things, and I guess in previous shows we've addressed this. Having to do with
what a good show we have.
Well, having to do with the good old Cincinnati method. And back in the days, Cincinnati, because of the Cincinnati method, there's this issue about how do ballots transfer when we have pay no attention to the man crawling in the background. There's
Isaiah,
right.
Our intern. Dave's here too, but he's not helping us.
There we go.
He's going to train me how
Somehow
to do
this reminds me of the old Soupy Sales show where there's a hand appears from off camera.
Control Plus? Well, I could have done that.
Meanwhile, I'll just do a little song here while we're at it. What I was going to say is that there were these 616 ballots from Leland Chung that were transferred to other candidates in round 2 of the exciting PR count.
This year?
Yes.
Okay.
And the real uncertainty was if you slipped a ballot anywhere in that stack, it could shift all the ballots down and cause a resulting different ballots, specific ballots transferred into other candidates. So one of the things that I could do when I got the ballot data last week is actually figure out exactly what fraction of ballots from Leland Chung had as their second preference or next available preference, would go to potentially all of the other candidates. And so I guess speaking in somewhat statistical terms, that's what we would call the expected values in the distribution. And in doing that,
I got it now, I think. Thank you.
That's pretty good. All right, excellent.
That was very smooth.
All right.
No one noticed that anything was going on here.
It's true. It was absolutely seamless.
I did a good job keeping my cool.
That's really excellent. Cool under pressure.
Okay, I didn't hear a word you said.
That's all right. All right.
I'm sorry.
Okay. So anyway, of those 616 ballots, if you actually just figure out what percentage of them had as their next available preference, let's say Minka Van Musicum or Craig Kelly or David Marr, whatever, you could actually you could actually determine what on average should be the expected number of ballots you'd expect to have in a transfer when they're transferring 616 out of the 2,000 some odd ballots that were there. And according to that, and I think we can actually put it back on the screen here, and I hopefully the numbers will show. Yeah, I think that'll be pretty visible. The thing is, Of those ballots, there we go. All right, okay, so don't move. The person most likely to get ballots off of that distribution was actually Craig Kelly, then David Marr, Minka, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the only people who really care are the ones that are a little bit in bold here. Craig Kelly, Minka, Nadim, and somewhere Dennis Carlone. Did I forget to, right? Oh, boy. All right, there we go, there we go.
He's not bolded.
So according to
here he
this,
is.
if you look at it in the official count, and this is something that people have to be aware of when they actually do these transfers in a few days, namely this, is that in the official count right now, Craig Kelly picked up 74 of those Leland Chung surplus ballots. Based on just on his average, in other words, what his expected share was, he should have got about 66. So he actually did pretty well. He had an advantage of getting 8 ballots, more than he would otherwise have been expected to have. All right? He got 10 more from what he got in the unofficial count, but in fact, on average, he should expect to get about 66. So he basically beat the odds. Minka, on the other hand, also beat the odds by 4. So she had 64, which was down from the unofficial count. And in the unofficial count, that's really one of the reasons why the margin was so narrow, is that Minka had done she'd lucked out in the unofficial, didn't luck out nearly as much in the official. But in fact, she's still actually ahead of the game. She should be expecting about 60. She has 64 in the official count. So if you just sort of roll the dice again, there's a good chance that she might actually drop. So she may have a net negative on it if there are any additional Leland Chung ballots.
That's a great chart, Robert. Thank you for doing it.
Nadim, on the other hand, in the official count, got 36 of those surplus ballots, which is also 4 more than he would expect. Dennis Carlone got 25, which is actually a little bit less than he would expect. So one might anticipate that if there's any shifting around based on the Leland's surplus, that in fact it wouldn't necessarily help Minka. If anything, it might actually hurt her a little bit. But on the other hand, you never know. So there's always a chance that things could swing the other way, but it's not necessarily something to be expected.
Does bolded one mean something right here?
I was just I was bolding some of them just to kind of show what kinds of swings happened from the unofficial to the official. And I added the green column a little later on, just to kind of indicate what should have been expected all along. And some candidates pretty much are spot on. In fact, it kind of makes me feel a little better about the Cincinnati method. In spite of the uncertainties about there being some shifting ballots, the actual number of ballots in the official count that people received aren't all that different than what they should expect just based on the averages, right? I mean, as I say, Craig Kelly kind of beat the odds pretty well there, so he shouldn't expect to do as well with a recount if there's any shifting of ballots. But for the most part, the Cincinnati method actually seemed to have done a reasonably good job of giving a reasonable representative sample of ballots. So I'm not as down on old Cincinnati as I was before. Okay, all right. So that's one thing I wanted to say about. And another thing that I mentioned last week, but since I posted up on a website, a lot of people have been commenting on it. Was this other fact about what I was referring to as alternate or different measures of popularity of candidates. So for this, we'll have to sort of scroll up a little bit here, but I'll sort of just tell the tale here. It's that if you look just at number 1 distribution, somebody like Minka, for example, finishes in 11th place, right? And it's actually pretty far up there, I believe. Yeah, there we go. It looks like you'll see some boxes with boxes full of numbers. All right, there we go. All right, so it's a little on the big side, but maybe we can kind of scale it down somehow. All right, no, we're okay. Okay, there we go.
I tried.
All right. So, all right, well, let's just get that as squared up as we can. That'll work. That'll do just fine like that. Okay, so let's switch to the machine here, and then I'll talk through this a little bit here.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so what you do here is if you just look at how many number 1 ballots people got in the official results, and again, some of this could shift a little bit with the recount, but what you see is just counting number 1 votes is Leland, of course, did the best, then David Marr, Tim Toomey, Dennis Benzen, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, I think I'm only doing the top 12 here. And what you'll see is that Minka is down there at number 11 in number one votes with 875 number one votes. You know, behind Ken Reeves, behind Nadeem, etc. Okay? But the interesting thing is that if you look, which is the column next to that, what you see there is what happens if you look at all the ballots and just count how many ballots listed of the various candidates either as a number one or a number two, which is a pretty good, healthy measure of popularity. I mean, if you're going to be ranked either one or two, that means people kind of like you.
Yep.
And the interesting thing about this is that when you use that as your measure, Minka, for example, jumps up to 7th place from 11th. Right? Some other candidates, of course, start dropping, like Carlone's dropped from 7th to 9th. Nadeem has dropped from 9th down to 11th, for example. So what this suggests here is that Minka had a lot of support, but a lot of those number ones became number twos, which is what every good candidate fears may happen when someone suspects that their favored candidate is, quote, safe, unquote. So you have that kind of betrayal of your preferred choice because you're somehow trying to elect another person who might also be a high choice, so you give your number one to the other candidate. Now the column to the right here, it really becomes quite telling. If you look and you count now how many ballots listed the various candidates either with a number one ranking, number two, or number three. And again, I would argue that that's also a pretty robust measure of popularity. Right? Well, again, Leland, of course, is still way ahead of everybody. It's actually shockingly ahead of everybody, honestly.
6,000.
Over 6,000, and the next closest competitor in terms of being ranked either 1, 2, or 3 is Denise Simmons, who's over 2,000 ballots fewer. It's really a dramatic drop-off. Right? And then you kind of run through some of the candidates in the 3,000s and further down. But what's interesting about that, if you look at top 3 votes, Minka ends up in 6th place.
Wow. Okay?
And people like Dennis Carlone are down in 11th place, Nadeem Mazen down in 10th place. In other words, those candidates, and Craig Kelly, I might add, is down in 9th place. So again, it's if the 4 candidates that were kind of in the virtual tie were Minka, Craig, Nadeem, and Dennis Carlone, then when you start looking a little bit deeper into the preferences, the other candidates fall pretty quickly. And Minka just stays in there, but unfortunately the power and the importance of the number one vote is, I think rather dramatically highlighted here. Now it actually gets even worse. I have to give a caveat to this though, which is to say that people who are incumbents, just because they're incumbents, have more name recognition. So the likelihood of them being ranked somewhere on the ballot is greater.
Right.
So if you start, saying, was somebody, such and such a candidate ranked anywhere, in the top 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, incumbents you should expect will start rising in the ranks because they're just better known, right? But it is interesting to see, for example, if you just say, well, let's rank the candidates based on whether or not they were ranked either 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. At that point, Minka has risen to 4th place out of the 25 candidates, right? And you can see Carlone and Mazen are way down at 11th and 12th. Craig Kelly is actually holding his own, but again, he's also an incumbent, so he's up there in 7th place, right? Now, maybe it's not the most indicative good statistic or not, but if you just say, okay, how many ballots had candidates listed anywhere in the top 9?
Which is all the people that were, all the seats.
Yeah, and exactly, and I chose that specifically because there are 9 people to be elected, right? So if this was a different type of election system where you say just vote for any 9 of the 25, then this might actually be more or less what you would expect to see. Now it's a little bit different because the truth is that there are a lot of people only vote 1 or 2 or 3 candidates. They don't actually rank all 9 of them. Right. So there's a bit of a drop-off, which kind of skews things a little bit in here. But you see, again, there were 17,000 plus ballots cast, or almost 18,000. And you can already see Leland is ranked on over half of all ballots, somewhere in the top 9. So that's a tremendous measure of popularity. But again, Denise goes down. But now, rather remarkably, Minka, who is defeated in the election, ends up finishing 3rd. So, I got to tell you, that to me is probably the most interesting statistic I've kind of
So
seen so far.
what does that mean?
Well, it means several things. One is that certainly that she has a little bit of an advantage due to the fact that she was an incumbent. Okay, so the fact that she's doing better than some of the newcomers, all right, not surprising. But the fact that she did better than several long-time elected incumbents like David Marr, Tim Toomey, way more than, Ken Reeves.
And Mark McGovern might be new, but he had name recognition.
He had
from
name
the
recognition,
school
that's
committee.
right. And that would explain why he would be expected to be somewhere high in the rankings in terms of popularity. But I think, candidates have forever, unless if they know what they're doing, they tell their voters, please don't play with your number one vote. I really need the number one vote. Don't treat me as to say, don't think that I'm safe,
Right.
and therefore it's okay to give your number one to another candidate to give somebody else a chance. That's a message that candidates are always saying. And if you want to see some clear evidence about just how important that is, this is perhaps the best evidence I've really ever seen of where abandoning what was previously might have been your number one vote. And it's actually kind of interesting when you go over to the recounts that's happening now. There are some people I know, for example, who were working all out for Dennis Carlone, but they had been longtime Minka supporters who are now actually working as watchers,
Right.
Inspecting, for Minka, because they're now going like, oh my God, what have I done? It's sort of like a little bit of buyer's remorse, or I shouldn't maybe say buyer's remorse, but the thing is they know very well. For example, if you had if a
They
person,
assumed she was going to win.
well, if you're only talking about a 13 vote margin, right? Think about it. If somebody was going to vote for somebody like Minka and then decided to vote for Dennis Carlone,
Yeah.
then that was one taken away from Minka, one given to Dennis, which is actually a swing of 2 votes.
Right.
So all it took was 6 people in this city to do that. And I know there were dozens, if not hundreds of people who did that.
Yeah.
And that's really what determined the outcome of the election. I'm going to go out on a little bit of a limb and say that's what made the distinction between Minka winning and Dennis Carlone winning, was that, it was really that little thing. So Minka ended up losing, Carlone wins. Had that abandonment not happened, it would have, I think, gone the other way. A candidate like Nadeem Mazen, though he's sort of affected like this, he was a newcomer who was really really picking up votes from other sources, non-traditional sources, whatever, much more so than somebody like Carlone. So I think that the way I understand that abandonment is really how people sort of traded out Minka in favor of Carlone. That's at least my interpretation of that. So anyway, that's one of the things that I found quite interesting as I was sort of digging through the data over the last few days. Another thing we can show is actually, if you go over here, it's over on the left tab there.
Oh, okay.
The one up on the top,
Yes.
okay?
Oh.
If you go back to there, all right, so we can take a look at this right here. Another thing you can do when you look at the ballot data, so this is something I didn't have available last week, but I have now, is if you look at all the number one votes for the various candidates, and I actually began this with the candidates who were elected, right? Because I think those are the ones people were most interested in. What you find is that for every person who gave a number one vote to Dennis Benzan, for example, not surprisingly, almost 13% of all those ballots had Denise Simmons listed as the next available choice.
Oh, so this is who they gave number 2s to?
These are the number 2s.
Oh, that's a good list.
Yeah, and then Ken Reeves then comes in as 11% of them. Bullets refers to one where it was just Dennis Benzan and nobody else.
Yep.
So about almost 11% of those ballots didn't have any other choices. No other rankings. And then, Leland. Leland's going to show up on every list because he was that popular, right? If you look behind Carlone, what you see is Nadeem ending up on 18% of those number 2s. So I guess this is a little bit of evidence of that little slate that they had put together, is that Mazen ends up being the preferred number 2 behind the Carlone candidate. But then it's actually not Janneke House, who was the other slate candidate. It's actually Minka, and then Leland before you get down to House, right? I think behind a Leland Chung ballot, we actually saw this evidenced in the other green column data before, but about 10% of all the number 2s from Leland would go to Craig Kelly. So, but it's actually pretty tight. It's really Craig Kelly, Mark McGovern, David Marr, all kind of in the same ballpark. If you look behind a Craig Kelly, definitely Chung. So there's a little bit of reciprocity there. Behind a Chung, there's a Kelly. Behind a Kelly, there's Chung. or at least
Yeah.
a higher fraction of them. If you go look at some of the ones like David Marr, who's more of a traditional independent of the city, not surprisingly, you find about 26% of those ballots have a Tim Toomey, who's the other sort of prominent.
That's a big number.
Yeah. You know, Leland's still in there though, and then Mark McGovern, and, you know, and et cetera. All right, if you look at the Nadim Mazen ballots, the most likely number 2 choice would be Janaki House. Again, a little bit of evidence, the fact that there was something going on with that little slate, because that's not necessarily a pairing I would expect to see. So there was some effectiveness of the slate, I think, is sort of indicated in that. But again, you can kind of look through a bunch of them. I think nobody would be surprised to see that behind a number 1 for Denise Simmons, that about 23 or so percent of those would have a Ken Reeves as the next available choice. All right, and I think if we can go scroll down a little bit without blowing up the studio, you see just as behind every Mar there was a Toomey, behind every Toomey there's a Mar, right? And you know, about close to a quarter of the ballots in that particular way. You know, again, I don't think it's as interesting to look necessarily at the candidates who didn't win, though, except for a few of them. I might have thought, for example,
What's the space for?
that was just because I had 26 boxes and 25 candidates.
Okay.
So I just broke it for the people who didn't win. But for example, behind Janaki House, you can see one of those slate candidates ends up with both of them have a little bit of an advantage, but still, it's about 27% of the Janaki House ballots seem to respect the slate, and then the other, then it kind of moved around. But still, 27% is actually pretty significant. Especially if they knew, if they'd ID'd all those all their voters, and they were kind of sending that message out. I guess one thing we commented on another week is Mushtaq Mirza was over in the lower left. Most of the various number 1s he got, there was
bullets.
Most of the highest frequency of number 2s was no number 2s. It was just bullets. Right, I think this is because a lot of them were pulled out of Ward 11, Precinct 1, in the public housing up there. So I think they were just sort of instructing people how to vote, maybe registering them and just saying, just vote for me or me and Nadim Mazen. And there was a huge number.
This is the same too.
Yeah, right. So you see certain patterns here. I think behind a Ken Reeves number 1, what you see is 35% Denise Simmons, 11% Dennis Benzan. Again, you see sort of a minority voter cohesiveness, I think it's fair to say.
Can I move up to see what Denise's was again?
Denise, behind Denise is Reeves. Yeah, so you see there's a reciprocal kind of relationship there. Simmons has 23% Reeves the number 2s, but Reeves has 35% Simmons as the number 2s. Right? I don't know exactly what I would read into that, but you know, it's still, for me, it's somewhat interesting information. You know, so anyway, that was the number 2 distribution, and again, I have that posted up on a website, and for anybody who kind of wants to know about that, you know, that's available. I'm trying to think if there's any other kind of geekiness I can share here. By the way, I do take requests if people have any particular things they want to find out about.
All you have to do is call us, 617-876.
Or contact me, and I'll sort of generate some of that sort of geeky stuff here. So again, in past elections before the computerization of the count, we didn't actually have all you really ever saw was the transfers of the number 1s going to the surplus transfers, but you never saw any information about additional preferences.
No, these are great lists.
You couldn't. There were always candidates who would suspect. They said, "Well, I know I didn't win that election, but I know that I was listed on half the ballots." Well, I can actually say now that's probably never been true, except for a few really famous candidates. Like lately, it's Leland Chung. In Alice Wolf's day, she would have been listed on more than half the ballots. Anthony Galluccio, during his best years, was listed on more than half the ballots. But in fact, oftentimes that would be pretty much it. Most, I think I did some numbers, and the most, I don't know if I have it posted up there, but the most common number of rankings. So here's an interesting quiz question. Did I ask you this last week, Ms. Sagat?
Go ahead, ask again.
What's the most common number of rankings that a voter expresses on a city council ballot with 25 candidates?
4.
It's actually 3.
I was going to say 3, but I thought you were going to trick me.
Right. And the median, right, meaning the point where you have just as many ballots with fewer choices as with more choices, is 5. and then it goes up to about 6 on the mean.
Do you
when
think that having the 25 candidates makes a difference, or is it always 3?
It's usually about that. It's like 3, 5,
Yeah.
and 7-ish, like
That
that.
makes sense.
In other words, people think that there are a lot of voters who vote really deep. That's actually not true,
No.
nor should it be true. People should vote for only the candidates that they actually have some sort of connection with, or respect for, or fondness for.
Well, you don't think your
connection.
ballot's gonna go that far.
And it probably isn't. In fact, I think I
That's
worked
silly.
out the numbers the other day. It's about 6, what was it again? 60 this year. It was a little low. 67% of all, about 66, 67% of all ballots
Didn't move,
at all.
yeah.
So
So there's no need to vote more than 3.
really, well, I mean, vote as many as you can. I think that's really good advice, because if it does move, you'd like to at least direct it to move the way you wish it to move. But really, it's still primarily that number one choice. And if anybody tells you otherwise, they're lying. It's, number ones, number twos to a lesser degree, etc. But as I say, this actually does play into the ongoing recount, because if not that many ballots are going to move, it just means you don't have to be so worried about making sure that you've matched all of the ballot records with the physical ballots now, because
Doesn't matter.
most of them aren't going to move at all anyway, and that's just the way it is. But it is interesting for people who think, oh my God, this is such a complicated system. They were asking me to rank 25 candidates. Well, let me tell you, we're not asking it, and nobody does it. Well, actually, I think it's about 3% or something like that of voters will vote all the way
That's
through.
a lot.
It is a
For
lot.
25 candidates, that's a lot.
I always get entertained by looking. I was going to do this. I would say, well, how many ones voted for just 24, and who was the 25th that they left off?
Oh, that'd be good.
So I'm going to say, I'm going to run that one just to
I
determine
voted for all of them but you.
who was the candidate most likely to be left off of a 24 out of 25
See,
votes.
this is where it's
I
too
won't
much
re-
information.
Too much.
As a candidate, you do not want to know this stuff.
I won't repeat it. The secret dies with me.
People don't